Shiripal.
It's not there is a microphone, you can come closer.
I'll just start with our usual prayers and then let's begin. Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम्. So let's begin. The topic I was told is an overview of Samkhya Shastra that can form a background for yoga and yoga sutras. Okay, so that's the topic I'm sort of taking for today. Also, as I imagine, this is like a more of an informal gathering, less of a talk. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to interrupt me and so on. So we can keep it interactive as needed. The other thing is, I'm not going in the standard order of how Samkhya is described. Okay, it's a slightly different sequence. I'm just letting you know. Also, slightly broader than just classical Samkhya alone. So there will be elements of what is academically considered not part of Samkhya, but there'll be elements of that in the talk because I feel it will help us understand it better. Okay, that's why we're doing that. Okay, so to begin with, the first question is why should we know all this? Right? Why would we want to know Samkhya in the first place? Like, what's the point? So at least in my opinion, the main reason to know is because we should have a desire to know. Okay, so this is something that is timeless, right? That has sustained so many years, right? So many cultural upheavals and so on, but it has stood the test of time. It is universally respected, and from the very old times, from what historians consider old literature, right from Chandogya Upanishad to Mahabharata to Bhagavad Gita to Puranas, Sankhya and Kapila have been held at the highest respect. Even those who criticize him, like there are other seers from other darshanas from ancient times, they considered Kapila as ancient. So he's like an ancient for the ancient ones. Even if they are criticizing him, that is done with the utmost respect. So this is something which is highly exalted. So then we should have a natural desire to know what is all this, right? And we would like to know. I think that is the purest way to approach the subject and the most beneficial to us. The other thing that is said traditionally is when we learn these things, there is a sort of self-culturing that happens because we go through this thought process and we are supposed to ruminate over it. So there's a standard traditional sequence. This is Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. So Shravanam means hearing. Mananam means analyzing what we have understood. Nididhyasanam is to ponder over it. Right? So once you have analyzed, you feel you have understood, you ponder so that it remains in the mind. So Nididhyasana literally means a desire to do dhyana. Is Nididhyasanam. So having that, there is a concept of manasa parishkara, which means the refinement of the mind. So when we hear exalted thoughts, exalted thinking, there is a refinement of the mind that happens. And that opens the door for the mind to be drawn towards more and more refined things. Okay? In that sense also, it is very valuable. So that is, I think, why we should know it. So come with a very pure, open mind, with a desire to know. The second thing is how to approach. Right? Often what happens is there is a natural tendency to compare. Oh, Sankhya, oh, Nyaya, Vedanta is better, Advaita is, and so on. There is a tendency to compare and pull one up, push other down, and so on. But I think how to approach it in the beginning is to approach with humility. Okay? So we can engage critically, that's fine. We can say, why is this so? Why is this not the other way around? And why did they say that? That's fine, but with humility and genuine respect, right? So critical engagement, but not jumping to judgments prematurely. Because as we know, people go through years of training in the Shastras and then their own tapas and so on before they can take any stand. So as we are hearing, we should say, okay, according to Samkhya, it is this way, according to yoga, it is that way, and not jump towards, okay, I like this, I like that, I think this is the truth. Because we should know that to be qualified to say those things is a long journey. So it is much better for us to just know what is being said where. Okay. So that is how we should, I think, approach such texts. And with the general belief, I think if something has lasted for so long and respected by brilliant minds like Patanjali and Vyasa and so on, it is bound to have some worth of its own. And therefore, let us understand why there is that worth. In fact, just before coming, so these are sort of random notes that I have, so I'm trying to structure that. But just before coming, I mean, I was reminded of this Vyasa in one of the commentary of one of the sutras of the fourth chapter. He says, just like in the rainy season, it's actually very beautiful in Sanskrit, but it's a yatha pravrushi trunankuras udbedena. So just like in the rainy season, when there is rain, when the grass sprouts, we can infer that there is a seed. There has always been a seed, and now it is sprouting. Similarly, he said, moksha marga shravanena, by listening to the texts or learnings about the path to moksha or liberation. He says, yasya roma harshashru pato drushyete. For a person who is thrilled, so that the hair stands on the end, and there are tears that flow by listening to these teachings about liberation. When you see that, then you can infer that tasya asti vishesha darshana bijam. Okay, then in that person, there is the seed of vishesha darshanam, of viveka khyati or prasankhyanam, of the sort of the ultimate truth. It can be inferred by seeing that, okay, that their tears are flowing, hair is standing on end, means this person has that seed in him. So that is the sort of the litmus test for Vyasa as to does one have the samskaras to be on this path. Okay. So Vishesha Darshana Bijam Apavarga Bhagiyam Karma Nivartitam Iti Anumiyate. It can be inferred. Okay. So this is the setting in which we should approach these subjects with a pure mind, open mind, with a desire to know. Okay. Now, a little bit about Samkhya. So Samkhya is said to be propounded by the sage Kapila. Kapila, like I've said, he is considered to be an avatar of Vishnu, a great Siddha, a great Muni. Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita 10th chapter that among the Siddhas I was Kapila and so on. But his original sayings are said to be lost now. So we don't have that. So what is normally accepted in sort of most of the academic circles is a text called Samkhya Karika by Ishwara Krishna. Okay. Now that is known as usually classical Samkhya. But you find Samkhya in many places. There is Samkhya in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, but elsewhere also there is a lot of mention of Samkhya. In fact, Krishna emphasizes that Samkhya and Yoga is not different. They are the same. Okay, and so on. There is Samkhya in Puranas. A lot of the Puranas, they will talk about the similar concepts of Samkhya, the evolution and sort of the pralaya back into. So we'll talk about that, how the creation evolves and how it goes back and so on. There is Samkhya in Upanishads, little bit in the Chandogya Upanishad, much more in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. So you'll find that elsewhere. Samkhya in the Pancharatra. Pancharatra Agama is one of the, again, highly regarded agamas mentioned in the Brahma Sutras also. And there are texts like the Ahirbudnya Samhita, which dedicates a lot of the beginning chapter to concepts very parallel to Samkhya. Okay? And of course, Mahabharata has a lot of discussion of Samkhya in the Shanti Parva and so on. So now I am sort of trying to cover this broad thing, incorporating points from all of these, rather than sticking very strictly to Ishwara Krishna's Sankhya, then which leads to a lot of debate because he excludes certain things and there is no Ishvara and why is there no? So it goes into that kind of a discussion. Okay. So that is about Sankhya. Now there is a relation between Sankhya and Yoga, which has been always accepted. In fact, Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutra is known as Sankhya Pravachanamala. Okay, so there is this tie-in between Sankhya and Yoga. In some sense, the concepts of Sankhya form a background for the theoretical framework of Yoga, but it's not necessarily that. So sometimes Yoga is known as Seshwara Sankhya. So sometimes they say that Yoga took Sankhya and added Ishvara to it. Okay? But there are a lot of studies and sort of also a thought that appeals to me, which is that is not necessarily how it went about. Okay, Yoga has had its own tradition. Sankhya has had its own tradition. Yoga has had Ishvara for a long time, and there has been some intermingling. It's slightly involved, so we can take that up a little later. But the main thing to know is there is Sankhya, there is Yoga, there is Sankhya Yoga. Again, Shvetashvatara Upanishad very much seems to be a Sankhya Yoga text. Bhagavad Gita very much is a Sankhya Yoga text. So they are sort of one, and we as students of yoga, therefore Sankhya is very relevant to us, right? And that is why we are sort of learning that. Now, Sankhya is said to be one of the Darshanas. Okay, this, I think the term has been mentioned in many talks recently. So you probably heard that term, Darshana. So Darshana is, in a sense, it's a view of the world, right, as per a certain school. Now, if you look at the Darshanikas, they are trying to explain the world, the creation, the experiences in different ways. And what we call the Astika Darshanas means the orthodox schools, the Astika Darshanas, they sort of fundamentally, axiomatically accept the authority of the Vedas. Okay? So they consider Vedas as given, and in the Indian tradition, Vedas are said to have come with creation. So it is known as Apaurusheya. So it is not authored by any seer, any rishi, not even by the God. So Vedas, they categorically say it's not written by God. And then some schools will say, no, the Ishwara did compose it. Someone will say Ishwara did not compose, he just passed it on. And in every cycle of creation, he passes on the same knowledge. So the Vedas are considered as given as far as these schools go. And now, if you think about a Darshanika or a seer or a Muni, what do they have to do? They have to explain the objective world. Right? They have to explain the world that we see around us. Then they have to have an explanation for the inner experiences. Right? So that's the second thing. And that has to be synthesized. And they have to do it in such a way that is according to what is said in the Vedas. Right? So it is not an easy task because the Vedas is a very huge corpus. But in sort of first glance, there are contradictions within what has been said. So you have to penetrate deeper and see how to synthesize it. So for any given Darshanika, trying to find an explanation that is self-consistent, complete, can explain the objective world, can explain the subjective experience, and be in line with the Vedas is sort of a challenge. And a lot of these rishis, the primary means that they do it is said to be through yoga. So in the sense that they go into this, I mean, they are seers, they are rishis, swatantraha munihi. So they'll sort of do dhyana. And we see in the first chapter of Yoga Sutras, where it says the bija of agama, the seed of all the agama, comes from the nirvichara samapatti. Okay. So there are four savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, and they go into this yogic state where the truth is revealed to them. Okay. So this is something that is accepted without questioning in this scheme. Right? So then these munis are doing that. They're going into this tapas and the truth is revealed to them and they describe it and that gets passed on through their disciples and so on. So there is a guru parampara. And then there are layers that get added. Sometimes it gets removed as things get transmitted. Okay. Now, when this happens, and there is a time where somebody highly respected, highly exalted, he will write the sutras. So the sutra will, in very brief, codify the system, right, and build a structure and framework. Like there's an evolving field, and then it comes to a certain level of maturity, somebody writes a textbook, and then that becomes sort of this reference work. So the sutras play that role, but the sutras are fundamentally very brief. So there can be many interpretations. So then there are commentaries that are written. Sometimes the sutrakara himself will write a commentary. Sometimes somebody else will write a commentary. But this is how the darshana fits in, where there are many revelations coming to seers, and then there is a process of codification and discussion and so on. So it's as you can see, it's a very open-ended system that flows forward. Okay. And then you can stop me anytime in case of questions and so on. Now the term Samkhya, sometimes it is described as Samkhya. Samkhya means enumeration. Samkhya is famous for, they have enumerated Tattvas. So Purusha, Prakriti, Mahat, Ahankar, Manas, and so on. So because there is a enumeration, it is said it is Samkhya. Okay? But there are other descriptions which I really like. So in the Ramanuja Bhashya of Bhagavad Gita, he says Samkhya Buddhi. Okay, so Samkhya is actually a term for Buddhi. And this is sort of well accepted in, so there's a book called Amara Kosha, which is like a dictionary or a thesaurus, right, with synonyms. So Amara Kosha clearly says Samkhya Buddhi. So Samkhya means Buddhi. So Samkhya Buddhi, Buddhya Avadharaniyam Atma Tattvam Samkhyam. Okay. So with the Buddhi, through the Buddhi, what needs to be firmly established? Buddhya Avadharaniyam means firmly established in the Buddhi, through the Buddhi. The Atma Tattvam, the pure self, right? Self with a capital S. That is Sankhyam. So Sankhyam is that which reveals through the Buddhi, through the process of Buddhi or thinking, through knowledge process, the Atma Tattvam. That is Sankhyam. So it is sort of very telling in the sense that it is very much in the Sankhya way of thinking, the Sankhya culture, that gives this importance to knowledge, to jnanam, and to buddhi. And that is how the self is to be revealed and understood. Okay? So that is Sankhya. Now, if you look at the Sankhya text itself, right? So every text, every darshana starts with something called a pratignya vakyam as to what is this about. Right? So Yoga Sutra start with Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Right? So what does that mean? Anushasanam means this is an explanation of what has been taught before. Okay, so yoga is there from time immemorial, and I am teaching the same thing. So Yoga Anushasanam. The Brahma Sutra start with Athato Brahma Jignasa. Okay, now begins therefore the desire to understand the Brahman. Okay, so Athato Brahma. Then the text, then you know what the text is about, and with that point of view, then you read the entire text. Here for Sankhya, of course, we don't have Kapila's original text, but Ishwara Krishna, he says, it's a long verse, but I'll just say the main part. So it says, Dukkhatraya Abhigata Jignasa Tat Abhigatake Heto. So there is dukkha, there is sorrow of three types. This Adhyatmika, Adibhautika, Adidaivika. So Dukkhatraya, we are all hit by these dukkhas, this sorrow, and we want to get rid of it. Tat apaghatake heto. So we want to get rid of it. Okay. And now what is the path? So from there begins the Sankhya. Okay. So the explanation of Sankhya essentially is to recognize the underlying sorrow that's part of the existence and find a way to come out of it. So be liberated from that sorrow. So that is the thinking of Sankhya. Now, the one problem with this often is that we tend to equate sorrow with sadness. Okay, so sorrow does not mean happiness. So are all Sankhya people sad all the time, right? Because even in the Yoga Sutra, it says dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha. Okay, so for one who understands, everything is dukkha. So that doesn't mean that all yogis are sad. In fact, it's sort of supposed to be the other way around. So what is happening here is, when you understand, I mean, they say that when you understand the essential truth, you recognize that what you see as happy and sad and so on is actually a form of bandha. It is a form of bondage, whereas the true essential existence is much more exalted. So, from a relative position, this is definitely dukkha, and there is a different plane of existence where this sukha and dukkha neither touches us. Okay, and therefore there is this dukkha traya abhig. And the reason they emphasize on dukkha is to say, I mean, if you start by saying, oh, there is too much pleasure, this is how you get rid of pleasure, I mean, nobody is going to understand or even begin engaging with the text. So the key experience for most of humanity since history is dukkha. There's more experience of sorrow that touches, and that's where one wants to be liberated from. So that's the starting point for most of these things. So the Sankhya begins by saying true understanding gives you freedom from sorrow. Okay, sorrow of three types. Therefore, Sankhya is meant to give this true understanding. So that is the framework in which sort of Sankhya Shastra comes in, and that is how we have to view it. And there are very ancient, like the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, are considered very ancient texts, even by like historians. Traditionally, they are all part of the Vedas, so they have always been there from time immemorial. They are eternal. Whereas academics, historians, they will analyze the language and try to ascribe a date and so on. Even that, from that point of view, they are considered very old texts. So, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a line that says, Tarati Shokam Atmavit. Okay? Tarati means one crosses over, swims and crosses over. What? Shokam, the sea of sorrow. Who? Atmavit, one who knows the Atma. Right? So it is said that from hearing such words, Tarati Shokam Atmavit, a student or an ardent student, naturally that curiosity arises. Okay, what does this mean? How can one cross over sorrow by knowing oneself? What is the meaning of knowing oneself? What is Atmavit? What is Atma? And that is the seed then that leads to and sort of the research into the Sankhya Shastra that comes in. Okay? So that is sort of the launch point to understand Sankhya. So that is where that comes from. Okay, so is it clear? Okay, so far. Let me just do. Yeah, so there is a Adibhautika, Adhyatmika, Adidaivika. So one is said to be from the physical, in very simple terms, from physical things like you are hurt and so on, like the objects that cause you sorrow. Adhyatmik is from within, from oneself, state of mind, state of body, and so on. Adidaivika is, we could say, fate or luck or divine forces, and so on. So that these are considered three types of sorrow. So if you go somewhere, it suddenly rains, there is a lightning, everything is the bad luck, that is Adidaivika. Okay. There is something around you that always causes you trouble, that's Adibhautika. There is some person also that is Adibhautika, right? That's causing trouble. Within you, you are sad, you don't know exactly why, that is Adhyatmika. Right? So these are the three types of sorrows. Okay. So it is very essentially a Sankhyan way of thinking to say knowledge will free you from sorrow. If you think about it, it's not a natural thing. I mean, we have heard it now so many times, we sort of don't appreciate it so much. But if you start from first principles, it is not so obvious that if you have sorrow and you are looking to get rid of sorrow, you would turn to knowledge. Okay. And Sankhya essentially brings in that angle that says it is true knowledge that gives you liberation from sorrow. So that's something we have to deeply ponder over and understand the beauty of bringing in that line of thought. By knowing the truth, you can counter your sorrow. Right? So that is where Sankhya comes. Now, the Sankhya also has a lot of reasoning. So we know from yoga that there is pratyaksha, anumana, agama, pramanani, three types of valid knowledge. Pratyaksha, direct experience, direct perception. Anumana, reasoning. Now, this reasoning, I mean, we just use one word, but it is a very sort of a deep subject. Even in the modern, like there is logic, there is mathematics, there is a lot of reasoning. Similarly, there's Nyaya Shastra, which is different types of reasoning, different types of flaws in reasoning. So that itself is a deep subject. Sankhya has a lot of reasoning in the way it goes about things, the way they think, but it has also a very strong aspect of agama. So a lot of the truth has been revealed by the great seers, and that is accepted. So they very much accept that some of the entities mentioned cannot be perceived. Reasoning can be fallible, but because our seers have said that, they have experienced it through their tapas and so on, we accept it. So Sankhya takes that. On the other hand, some of the other, like the Tarka Shastra, will focus more on reasoning. Right? They will not tend to give too many explanations from tapas and so on. They will say through reasoning, they will try to establish things. So there have been different approaches to truth. And Sankhya is one that combines reasoning and tapas and so on. And yoga falls in the same tradition, but yoga focuses much more on the levels of tapas, the degrees of tapas, the approach to tapas and so on. Okay. Now let us see how this explanation of the world starts coming in. Right? So once again, to go back, there is the external world, there is the inner experience, and there is all the vast knowledge of the Vedas and the Upanishads and everything that has to be reconciled. So now, firstly, we see that the world in general, the stone, the tile, the wood, etc., it is achetana, means it is not conscious, it is not self-aware. Those are things. Okay? So that is known as jada. Jada means it is, you need something else to know it. It doesn't know itself. It doesn't even reveal itself. For it to be known, the eye has to see it, the mind has to cognize it. Otherwise, it is just a thing. So it is, most of the world is jada. Okay. Then we look at, let's start. I mean, this is where I'm slightly going in an unconventional kind of a sequence to sort of explain how these things have come about. But now there is the interface between ourselves and the world. Okay? So how do we interact with the world? How do we know the world? That is indriyas. Okay. So the indriyas, the eyes, the ears, and so on. This is how we interact with the world. So there are 5 indriyas, like we know the sense of hearing, sense of touch, and so on, sense of taste. Now the indriyas, technically, and that's also there in the Yoga Sutras and so on, the indriya is not the eye, it is not the skin. It is that part of the mind, okay, which goes forth to the world, as it is said. Okay, so in this system, more than sensory influences coming in, it is as though the indriyas are going out and reaching out to the world. So it is part of the mental framework when we say indriyas, which we can understand. Finally, the eyes are sending signals, it is going into the sort of the mental substance anyway. So there are the indriyas. There are 5 indriyas of sensing, jnana indriyas, 5 indriyas of interacting with the world. They are the karma indriyas, the hands, the legs, and so on. So there are 10 tattvas, and there is the world. Now Sankhya brings in something somewhat unique, which is not there in Vaisheshika, Nyaya, etc., which is a concept of tanmatra. Okay. So what is this tanmatra? So if you think of what the chakshu, the eye indriya, the indriya of sight, what does it sense? Okay. So it says it senses form in the most essential thing, right? So wherever there is form, the eye can sense it. Wherever there is sound, the ear can sense it. Wherever there is a sense of touch, the indriya of touch can sense it. So this is known as grahyasya charamo bhavaha. Okay, which is the, if you go to the things that we sense and go to the further subtler, the subtlest part is known as tanmatra. Okay, so that tanmatra is rupa in its purest form, rasa, taste in its purest form, shabda in its purest form, and so on. So those are tanmatras. So that is a sort of a unique unifying aspect, because there are so many things that have a form. You don't want to enumerate all of them. So what is common in all of this is the form. And therefore there is a pairing between the chakshu indriya and the rupa tanmatra. Right? Wherever there is form, it can be sensed. So those are the tanmatras. But now, where is this rupa coming from? Where is this sound coming from? Okay. That is where the elements come in, where we say Prithvi, Ap, Teja, Vayu, Akasha, and so on. So one that has rupa, okay, is the Akasha, the Agni element, right? The Teja. Okay. The sound, there is the Akasha element. So what happens is, if the Indriyas is sensing the Rupa, the form, there is something that has a form. Right? The thing that has a form, those are the elements. Okay. And therefore, there are 5 elements corresponding to these 5 Indriyas, corresponding to the 5 Tanmatras. There is Prithvi, Ap, Teja, Vayu, Akash. Now, there is one more difference, because in the Yoga Sutra also it says, it's a Vishesha, Avishesha. Right? When the Sutra says, when describing Prakriti. Now, Vishesha means there is a Sukhadi Janakatvam. Okay, it can give you pleasure. It can, so there is a Sattva, Raja, Tama aspect. Okay, Sattva leads to Sukha, Raja leads to passion, activity, and so on. Tama leads to dullness, delusion, contrary knowledge. Okay. So the elements have that. The Tanmatras do not have that. Tanmatras are the essential form of Rupa. They do not have the Sukhadi Janakatvam, but Prithvi, Ap, Tej, Vayu, Akash, they have that. Okay. Also, the elements, they have a gradation of Tanmatras. So Akasha has only Shabda, only sound. Okay. Vayu, so the definition of Vayu is Rupa Rahita Sparshavan Vayu. So it is that which has Rupa, form. It has touch. Sorry, it does not have form. Rupa Rahita Sparshavan, it has touch. That is Vayu. Okay. So something, if it has touch and form, that is not Vayu. Then that is Prithvi. Okay, so that is the Prithvi Tattva. So Prithvi Tattva has all the 5. Okay, Vayu has only touch, Akasha has only hearing, okay, and so on. And they sort of, the 5 Tanmatras add up so that the Prithvi has everything. Now, all these 5 things also, they are also sort of can be realized only through yogic tapas, okay? Because the world, so there is the process of Panchikaranam, it is said, whatever we see in our world, it is a mixture of all these 5 elements, right? So whenever you see anything, the form part is lent to it by Teja. There is little bit of luster is coming from the water element and so on. So there is a mixture of elements that is there here in this world. We won't go into that. There is a process of Panchikaranam. But hopefully you are able to see where these notions and concepts are coming from. If you want to explain the world without actually enumerating everything, I mean, you don't want to explain the world by saying tree and stone and this, and you want to find the commonalities and how in a brief way we can explain the world. So quite uniquely, instead of focusing only on the objective, it starts from the subjective, Indriyas, Tanmatras. So it starts from oneself outwards. Okay. So Indriyas, Tanmatras, and the Bhutas. Okay. Now there is another thing called Manas. Okay. Now where is this Manas coming from? Because the 5 Indriyas are there. But the thing with the Indriyas is, so let's say I touch this headphone box, and I am also seeing that headphone box. Now I know that the thing I'm touching is the same one that I'm seeing, right? Now who is knowing that? Because the sense of touch only knows this thing through touch. The sense of eye only knows this by seeing it. But somebody is unifying. Somebody is saying that both of these are the same thing. So that is the role of the Manas, which we can accumulate the information from the Indriyas and then form a notion of a thing, which is, we say, okay, the thing I'm seeing is the same thing that I'm touching. Right? So that is again a unique role that Manas has. So then we are set to Ekadasha Indriyani, 5 Karma Indriyas, 5 Jnana Indriyas, and Manas. Manas has another role. It is Sankalpa Vikalpatmakam. So the mind, there is a desire, there is wish. I want, I don't want, I like, I don't like, and so on. So this like, don't like, want, don't want, and interpreting the world, that comes in the realm of Manas. So Sankalpa Vikalpatmakam Manaha. So that is where Manas comes. Okay? So what we are doing here right now is, Samkhya is well known for enumerating these tattvas, which was then accepted maybe with some modifications by most of these schools of Indian philosophy. Wherever they don't accept, they criticize, but they definitely spend time trying to understand those tattvas. And here's where we are understanding that. So we have seen the 10 Indriyas and Manas, which is 11 Indriyas. Then the Jada world, the external world, made up of the 5 elements, the Bhutas. And then the notion of tanmatras, which is subtlest of the subtle, which can only come from understanding, can come from savichara, nirvichara, samapatti, because sukshma vishaya of is for the savichara, nirvichara, samapatti. Okay, so we have come up to this point. Sorry,
21
that takes us to 11 plus 5, 16 plus 5, 21. Correct. So that comes to 21 tattvas. Now, beyond that, now these are things that are more coming from an internal recognition. So from the process of dhyana and so on. So there is this thing called ahankara or ahankritihi. This is the sense of I-ness. Okay. So whereas the mind says like, don't like, and so on, the I-ness says I like. Okay. So there is a description in the Yoga Sutras also, where let's say you are seeing a pot. So that is known as ghataha. So you see it, you know it. So the indriyas will say ghataha. Okay, they see it. The mind also recognizes it as ghataha. Then there is ghatam janami. Okay, know the pot. So the mind now comes to a point where from the indriya which says ghataha, the mind says know the ghatam janami. But the janami, the I know, that comes from the ahankara. So this ahankara is the sense of I that gets superimposed on each experience. So each and every experience, the ahankara says I know, I do, this is mine, and so on. That is coming from this tattva. So that is also just a tattva, which says aham janami, aham karomi, and so on. That is coming from ahankara. Samkhya says, and we can discuss this a little further. This ahankara is also an instrument. It is a jada, and that feeling of I-ness is superimposed on it. And we can discuss that a little later further. But we have to recognize that there is a distinct layer in the inner experience of ahankara. Okay. And sometimes that layer goes away. So it says when in sushupti, in complete sleep, the ahankara takes a backseat. So there is, it is categorically said in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and so on, that this ahankara sort of, it dissolves into mahat. Okay, so there is no ahankara at that point. So ahankara is a temporal experience of I know, I am, and so on. Now, and we'll come to that slightly later. Beyond the ahankara, there is the buddhi. Okay? This is adhyavasayatmika buddhi. So buddhi is one that makes the nishchaya, the decision, okay, as to this is what it is. Idam avashyam kartavyam. This is to be done. This is how it is to be known. So the final decision maker is said to be the buddhi. Okay. So the manas is saying I like, don't like, and so ahankara says I will do, and the buddhi takes the final call that is said to lie with the buddhi. Now this buddhi is at the level of the individual. Okay? At the cosmic level, it is known as Mahat. Okay? At the level of creation, it is known as Mahat. With this, we are going further and further backward. And now you can see that what the system is trying to explain is it's trying to find the objective ultimate and also the subjective ultimate. Okay. So what is that ultimate? So we say, okay, subjectively there are indriyas, there is manas, there is ahankara, there is buddhi or mahat, and so on. And objectively there are the bhutas and tanmatras. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay? I'll come back. Now, once you come to this mahat, there is one level further. Okay, so they say, okay, where is this mahat coming from? And there the Samkhya say there is this notion of Prakriti. Okay, so the Prakriti is the underlying layer for all things. Okay, and Prakriti by its very nature is not a conscious entity. Okay, it is not conscious, it is not self-aware, and everything is evolved from Prakriti. That is the Samkhya point of view, which is also the yoga point of view. Okay. So then if that is the case, okay, in our understanding, we don't just know the pot. I just don't say I know the pot. I know that I know the pot. Right? Then I know that I know that I know the pot. So within us, we have this complete consciousness, which can go sort of infinitely, right? So there is this notion of knowing in completeness, knowing applied to itself. Know that I know that I know that I know. That is a complete thing. So that is known as Chaitanya. That is consciousness. Right? The consciousness is this knowing and awareness of knowing ad infinitum. Awareness of knowing, therefore awareness of knowing. So that element that is there, that is explained as the Purusha. Okay. So then Samkhya comes to this point where it says there is this Purusha, which is the realm of the conscious. There is the Prakriti, that is the realm of the something that is not conscious. Prakriti then transforms itself in various rich ways that leads to all this creation. The Purusha is unchanging because it is the locus of all consciousness. Okay, and it is the interaction of this Purusha with Prakriti that leads to the world and the world experience. That essentially is the key insight that is coming from Samkhya. Okay, now a little bit of this Ankara, Mahat, and so on. Now, to understand the influence of the Purusha on the Prakriti, the yogic texts are the best ones, actually, the Yoga Sutra and the Bhashya and so on, where it very clearly says, so the Purusha and the Chitta, okay? Chitta is a evolute, something that has evolved from Prakriti, changes in, we'll see how that comes. But the Purusha lends consciousness to the Chitta, okay? And that is why Chitta arises. Otherwise, Prakriti would never have formed a Chitta. Okay, there is a Purusha, and it is known as Sarga, there are cycles of creation. The Purusha gets combined with the Chitta that evolves, and the same combination continues from time immemorial, okay, until there is liberation. So through the cycles of birth and death that is accepted in the Indian system, it is the same Chitta, it is the same Purusha that go together. And when the influence of Purusha falls on the Prakriti, that manifests itself as Buddhi, Ahankara, Manas, and so on. So the first influence leads to so the Prakriti is the uninfluenced state. Right? That is known as Pradhana or Prakriti. That is made up of Sattva, Raja, Tama. Okay, the three gunas. The moment there is some influence, that turns into Mahat or Buddhi. Mahat in the cosmic scale, at an individual scale, it is Buddhi. Okay. Then there is a part of Mahat that evolves into Ahankara. Then there is further evolution that happens. This has happened at the beginning of creation, right? And through the cycles of birth and death, it is only the physical things that are given away. The Sukshma Sharira it continues to be coupled with the Purusha. Okay, so that is the notion here. Now there is more richness within this. Now the Ahanka, okay, let's talk about Sattva, Rajatama a little bit. So they are the three gunas. Bhagavad Gita actually talks quite a lot about it. So it is one of the texts that spends a lot of time talking about Sattva, Raja, and Tama gunas. Yoga Sutra says Prakriti is actually made of Sattva, Raja, Tama. So usually guna means a quality or an attribute, but here it is a substance. So it is made of a Sattva, Raja, Tama guna. What is the characteristic? Sattva, it gives sukha, jnanam. Okay, so it gives joy, jnanam, knowledge, vairagya, Ishwara, and so on. Sorry, Aishwarya is from Raja. Raja gives activity, Aishwarya, and desires. So that is created from Raja. Tamas gives dullness, delusion, wrong knowledge, and so on. So the recognition by these seers is every entity has an influence on the consciousness, so to speak. The influence can be divided into three: the sattvic type, the rajasic type, and the tamasic type. And therefore, all of Prakriti is made up of sattva, raja, tama gunas. And everything that we see is sort of a pattern, a specific combination of these three gunas. Ahankara is a specific combination, Manas is a specific combination, your Manas is one combination, my Manas is one combination. They are different because there are samskaras and vasanas, but in the end, it is all some pattern of gunas. When the pattern equalizes, then it becomes pradhana prakriti. Right? Prakriti where sattva, raja, tama gunas are in an even state. Otherwise, usually the sattva will dominate, raja will dominate, tamas will dominate. It will change with time. And that is where the creation process takes place. Okay. So Now, Ahankara is what it says is there is a sattvic part of Ahankara, which is known as Vaikarika. I don't know how technical to go, but then that leads to Indriyas and the Manas. Okay. Then there is a Rajasic part called Taijasa, and there is a Tamasic part called Bhutadi. And from Bhutadi, all the unconscious things are said to evolve. In one of the texts, Mahat, because you were asking that question, Mahat, which is it is called Mahan. Okay, it is Mahat because it is great. It is Mahan. Now the beauty is the sattvic part of Mahat. Okay, that leads to this uh, Chitta, Manas, Indriyas, and so on. The tamasic part of Manas of Mahat is the Mukhya Prana. Okay? So when we do pranayam, that's the entity that we are dealing with is a highly exalted entity. Okay, it is not just Vayu or sinners or any such thing. It is the Rajasic part of Mahat, which is the most fundamental aspect of creation. Right? So in the Yoga Sutra also it is said, Linga, Vishesha, Avishesha, Linga Matra, Alingani, Guna Parvani. So all of them are gunas. So Linga Matra is the Mahat, the first sign of existence, right? First sign of creation. Of that Mahat, the Rajasic aspect that gives all activity, that has all the power and potential, that is the Mukhya Prana. Okay, so the reach of yoga when we say pranayam is to this very, very high caliber entity called Mahat and its Rajasic aspect. Right? So that is Mahat. I think we have about 10 minutes. So I'll have to wrap up. So one of the important parts of all this is I have been saying things evolve. Okay? So that is again a very fundamental tenet of Samkhya. It is called Satkaryavada. Satkaryavada means nothing goes completely, nothing vanishes, and nothing gets created out of the blue. Whenever something manifests, it existed in a different form. Okay? So again, the Chandogya Upanishad, very old Upanishad, it said Vacharambanam Vikaro Namadeyam Vrittika Ityeva Satyam. So if you look at all the things, clay, pots, and so on, ultimately it is all clay. Okay? And it is our speech that gives names like pot and toy and so on. It is all clay. Yoga Sutra also says that Parinama Ekatvat Vastu Tattvam. Why do we call something a Vastu? Because the Parinamas, the transformation are happening together in a coordinated way. Therefore, we see that as a thing. But ultimately, everything is just Sattva Rajatama in different patterns. Okay? So now this observation leads Sankhya to the unique insight that everything that comes had exist in a previous some other form and then it manifests. And that is why they say that from Pradhana Prakriti came Mahat. Okay, it is just it evolved from it. Just like from a seed, the plant comes, from a bud, the flower comes, right? So from Pradhana Prakriti comes Mahat, from Mahat comes Ahankara, and there is a lot of detailed discussion around this in the Yoga Sutras and the Bhashya. But the key thing is, and there are reasons, this is Asad Akaranat, Upadana Grahana. So there are 5 reasons given as to why this Satkaryavada is there. But it says something that doesn't exist never comes. So there are certain examples like the horn of a hare, a rabbit with a horn. You don't see it, it never comes. If anything could come out of the blue, why don't we see such things? Right? So it says, okay, there is Shakyasya Shakyakaranat, Shaktasya Shaktakaranat. So there is always a potential, there is certain order, and that Shakti exists, and then it manifests when the right conditions are there. Right? That is the essential concept of this evolution. And therefore, in the Yoga Sutras also, it says, where there is the sutra where it says that just like a farmer, if he wants the water to spread, he doesn't carry the water with a spoon. He has created these embankments of mud. If he removes the embankment, the water flows by itself. Okay, similarly, the Prakriti can get to many forms. You have to remove the obstacles. Obstacles are of the nature of adharma, sort of wrong actions that have been done, that have deposited the impressions on the chitta. And by doing yoga, by doing tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwara pranidhana, etc., those obstacles get removed and the Prakriti naturally flows because it has that Shakti. Right? So these concepts that once you accept, once it starts, then it has a very wide reach into helping us learn yoga, then how to behave, what is life, what is oneself, and so on. The other thing that one has to know from this is the way we look at ourselves as when we say, okay, I am angry, I am sad, I am happy, etc. For the Sankhya, it is just the manas acting. Manas is just an instrument and it is dirty. And that is why it is behaving. It has a lot of impurities. Right? That is why yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya. So the mala, the impurities are removed by yoga. So like we say, right, the child, it is throwing tantrums, it doesn't know. Let me calm it down, it will be silent. So similarly, for someone who has sort of inculcated Sankhya and so on, it's not that they will never feel angry, they will never feel sad and so on, but they know that, okay, maybe the Rajaguna has grown and let me be aloof. And that is the part that Bhagavad Gita emphasizes a lot on. So he says Guna Atita. So the Sankhya, he sees that all of this is happening, but this is simply a play of the gunas. And let me not attribute it to myself. It is just the ahankara. So the sense of self changes. Rather than seeing something as me, it says it's a combination of Purusha and Prakriti in the form of ahankara, manas, and so on. And the manas, the indriyas, they have their own purity, impurity, which changes with time. And that is leading to all these experiences and reactions. And once we sort of, it is said that once we accept that framework, then we are untouched. So Padma Patra Iva Ambasa, the lotus leaf in the water, it never becomes wet because the water drop just sits on it. Right? So this understanding helps build that insulation, because now you see that these are just material things that are acting and it is not the essential nature of things. Right? So that is where the Sankhya is coming in. There are some certain other deviations. There's one is the concept of Shakti, okay, which also some of the schools that takes a very big place of its own, right? And but I don't think we have time to go into that. There is another concept of the Dharma Bhuta Jnanam. So these are quite related and very interesting. Maybe some other time we can go into that. I think one thing I must touch upon is Ishwara, okay, the divinity. Now, the Sankhya Karika doesn't mention Ishvara, but most of the Sankhya texts, the Kapila Gita, the Ayurveda Samhita, etc., they definitely talk about Ishvara. They talk about the role of the Ishvara. Vedanta is very emphatic in saying that everything is the Prakriti is actually coming from divinity, from Brahman. Right? So it's mainly the Shvetashvatara Upanishad that starts by unifying the three. And it says there is Ishvara, and there is the individual, the Jiva, the Purusha, and there is a Prakriti. Yoga brings Ishvara in a very strong way, and it brings a certain role for the Ishvara also. First, he is untouched by, say, karmas and so on, but by the japa and the dhyana, it says tataha pratyak chetanadhigamo antaraya abhavascha. So the Ishvara is the one who leads us to know ourselves. Pratyak chetana adhigamaha. So the knowing, the reaching of the self by each individual comes through the grace of the Ishvara, says yoga. And removal of obstacles, antaraya abhava. So that is coming from Ishvara. The older Sankhyan texts very much often, instead of emphasizing the multiplicity of Purushas, they talk of Purusha in the singular, right? As though the Purusha one as the main cosmic divinity influencing the Prakriti. So the Ishvara, the Brahman, very much also fits into the Sankhya, even though Sankhya Karika doesn't mention it. Tattva Samasa mentions it, and there is all many of other texts that mention it. We can have a discussion on why Sankhya Karika may not be mentioning it and so on. There is also a historical aspect to some of these, where these Darshanikas have to establish their philosophies, where opponents are not accepting the Vedas. Right? So you have to then come to a common ground. And in the common ground, we say, okay, let's leave Ishvara out and still let me establish my school of thought, the Satkar. So there are all these influences that come in, and you can see that in different texts. Okay, so I think now the main thing to take away from all this is this understanding of the search for truth is a way to counter sorrow. Okay. And the how the different texts, and usually we start with the Bhagavad Gita, which covers a lot of, it covers Vedanta, it covers its own teachings, covers Sankhya, how it beautifully integrates the objective world, understanding of that, subjective inner experience, and the divinity, and how all the three sort of relate to each other. And the divinity, one manifestation of divinity is all the teachings of the Vedas. Okay? So all of this is integrated beautifully in just 25 tattvas, if you include Ishwara. Right? So 24 tattvas, 25 tattvas. Just by mentioning those and then pondering about those, delineating them, the whole creation plus the Vedas are explained in a very brief sort of, the kernel is identified by Sankhya, and that is why sort of that brings in the beauty of this whole system. So with this, I'll stop if you have any questions or anything.
Sorry, can you just explain again? So chitta, did you say according to Samkhya that is it like innovated by Purusha, or is it's not, it's still Prakriti, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So chitta is completely Prakriti. It is not conscious, it is not self-aware, but it is the one that is in the closest contact, so to speak. Contact doesn't mean physical contact. It is the one that receives the influence of the Purusha. And therefore, the chitta, it is as seemingly conscious. It is as though it becomes conscious. It is like a camera which is shooting. So the camera is shooting, but the camera doesn't know. It is just a camera. So chitta is like the camera. It is seeing everything. It is shooting, but the knower is somewhere else. It is the humans that are seeing it that they know. Similarly, the consciousness is within the Purusha. Chitta is just an instrument.
And so the buddhi is probably the closest to
Yes.
what makes the camera.
Correct. Okay. Anything else? Was this useful or? All right. Okay. Thanks. I think I was asked to stop by 5 o'clock.
Thanks, Srineet.